Do not use the old coastline maps. If this recording has reached any station above the 70-meter contour, keep your transmitter live. Do not switch to battery silence unless the tower is physically underwater. Do not trust any tide schedule printed before tonight. And if your local weather system issues a marine advisory for a city that has never touched the ocean, do not correct it. Log it. Repeat it. Keep the signal alive. This is Daniel Hale, recording from AM 1720, Emergency Relay Desk 3. The time on the wall clock is 2:14 in the morning. The time on the sea level model is 6:41 in the morning. The time printed on the tide schedule is yesterday. That is the first thing I need you to understand. Nothing in this room agrees with anything else anymore. The clock still moves forward. The printer still feeds paper. The transmitter is still warm under my left hand. But the maps are behaving like the event has already happened. Not like it is happening. Already happened. At 1:03 a.m., the global cryosphere index dropped below the emergency threshold. At 1:07, Greenland stopped returning stable ice values. At 1:11, the Antarctic uplinks began reporting surface collapse, basal melt, and thermal noise across bands that should not have been connected. At 1:18, the mountain glacier network stopped labeling its own data as ice. Not melted, not broken, not missing. Reclassified. At 1:22, the Arctic sea ice mesh went dark. At 1:24, the Southern Ocean buoys started returning open water codes from beneath shelves that still had not visually failed. At 1:29, every polar map on this desk went white, then gray, then blue. At 1:32, the system printed one line. Global stable ice signature, 0.00%. That should not be possible. Not in one night. Not in one century. Not in one clean sequence. But the impossible part was not the ice. The impossible part was the coastline. Because the final coastline appeared first. Before the last ice signature vanished. Before the final Antarctic ping. Before the Greenland feed dropped. Before the tide gauges saw the water. The map drew the world after the melt. And then the melt started following it. I'm going to keep my voice steady, because that is what this job is for. A voice on a frequency is a kind of railing in the dark. You hold it. You move one hand in front of the other. You say the numbers. You say the warnings. You say the things that are still true, even when the map behind you is becoming a stranger. So we start with what is true. Floating sea ice does not raise the ocean the way people imagine. If you drop ice into a glass and let it melt, the water does not climb up the side after the ice disappears. It was already displacing its weight. That is the simple part. The white cover matters because it reflects sunlight. It cools the poles. It stabilizes systems larger than any one city, larger than any government, larger than any one generation of people who thought the ice was just scenery at the top and bottom of a classroom globe. But the real sea level rise comes from ice sitting on land. Greenland. Antarctica. Glaciers in the mountains. Frozen reservoirs that have been holding water above the ocean for thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of years. If all of that land ice returns to the sea, the ocean does not rise by a few inches. It rises by meters, dozens of meters. Enough to redraw continents. Enough to remove ports, airports, highways, neighborhoods, power stations, hospitals, old cemeteries, old capitals, whole histories built close to water because water was how civilization learned to move. The working number on this desk is 70 meters, 230 feet. That number has always sounded like a thought experiment. Something for museum displays. Something for climate lectures. Something with a timeline long enough for the human mind to misunderstand it as mercy. Tonight, it is printed on every sheet in front of me. Plus 70.00 meters. Not estimated. not projected. Final. The station was not built for this. No station was. But ours was considered safe because we are inland, elevated, redundant, ugly, and old. There are advantages to ugly buildings. No glass lobby, no waterfront view, no architecture pretending the weather will always respect it. Concrete walls, steel door. A tower that has survived ice storms, heat waves, 3 lightning strikes, 2 ownership changes, and 1 winter where the generator room flooded from below even though there was no flood outside. That was years ago. We joked that the building remembered being a boat. Nobody is joking tonight. At 1:40, the first coastal evacuation layer failed. Not because the system crashed, because the coastline underneath it changed. The old red zones were still red. Then everything behind them turned orange. Then yellow. Then another red line appeared inland. Then another. Then the screen stopped using city names and began using elevation. 10 meters, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. A perfect contour. Too perfect. That is where the room changed. Not physically. Not yet. But everybody who has ever worked a night desk knows when a room stops being just a room. The air gets attentive. The equipment sounds closer. The lights seem less connected to the ceiling and more connected to your breathing. You become aware that the transmitter has been speaking longer than you have been alive, and that maybe speaking is not always the same thing as warning. At 1:44, New York dropped from the Coastal Continuity Network. At 1:46, Miami was no longer listed as a city but as a water grid. At 1:48, London's secondary emergency layer stopped accepting street-level routing. At 1:51, Rotterdam returned 1 burst of traffic data and then a harbor depth reading from inside what used to be a train station. At 1:53, Shanghai sent a packet so large the terminal froze for 4 seconds, then refreshed with the word depth, where population should have been. I did not read those lines on air. There are warnings that save people. And then there are warnings that only prove someone is too late. We were instructed years ago never to announce total system losses until regional relay confirmed. But tonight, regional relay was the thing failing. Not because towers were down, because the map no longer believed those towers were on land. At 1:56, the system displayed a marine advisory for Baton Rouge. At 1:58, it displayed a storm surge watch for Little Rock. At 2 o'clock, it displayed a small craft advisory for Memphis. At 2:02, it displayed coastal fog for St. Louis. At 2:04, it displayed tide tables for Omaha. At 2:06, it displayed surf conditions for Denver. That was when I stopped reading automatically. There is a kind of mistake that is funny when you are tired. A wrong city in a weather feed. A misplaced decimal. A tide gauge labeled in the wrong state. You circle it. You send it to engineering. You complain about software. You refill your coffee. But when the same mistake repeats in the direction of a future disaster, it stops being a mistake. It becomes a schedule. Denver has never needed surf conditions. The system gave it 6-foot swells by dawn. I tried the standard checks. Local cache, bad map tile, satellite overlay mismatch, corrupt elevation file, legacy training mode. Disaster simulation accidentally pushed live. Every explanation failed in a different way. The local cache was clean. The map tiles were current. The elevation layer matched the national data. The satellite feed was delayed but consistent. The simulation server was offline. The backup server returned the same coastline. The printed map from the drawer showed the old world. The screen showed the new one. And then the printer began marking the differences. Not in red. In black. Like corrections. Correction. Shoreline. Correction. Harbor. Correction. Inlet. Correction. Channel. Correction. Open water. Correction. Open water. Correction. Open water. I tore the page off before it finished. That was a mistake. The printer remembered where it had stopped. The next page began with this station. Correction. Shoreline contact point. I need to be clear. There is no ocean outside this building. There is no wave against the foundation. There is no salt smell in the air. There is no fog against the east fence. There is only the service road, the grass field, the empty parking spaces, the tower, and the red light blinking at the top. But the system has labeled this relay as shoreline. Not future shoreline, not projected shoreline, current shoreline. The screen shows water on 3 sides. The screen shows this building as a narrow point of land. The screen shows the transmitter mast touching the new coast. And under that, in a field meant for infrastructure notes, someone or something has written, "Contact accepted." I know how that sounds. That sounds like the part where the story stops being technical and becomes something else. But everything tonight has arrived through technical channels. No voice from the sea, no face in the static, no impossible knocking from the wall, just data behaving with intention. That is worse. A monster can be dismissed by daylight. A wrong number cannot. A wrong number sits in the log. A wrong number enters the archive. A wrong number gets backed up in 3 places and survives the people who laughed at it. At 2:11, I pulled the sea level fingerprint layer. Most listeners never hear that phrase, sea level fingerprint. It sounds poetic. It is not. When a huge ice sheet loses mass, it changes gravity. Water does not simply rise evenly everywhere like liquid in a bathtub. The ocean responds to mass, to rotation, to the way Earth bends and shifts. Near a melting ice sheet, sea level can behave differently than it does far away. The pattern of rise and fall becomes a kind of fingerprint, not a hand, not a face, a physical signature. That is why the model matters. That is why we compare the melt source to the coast. That is why a trained operator can look at the pattern and say, this is Greenland heavy, or this is Antarctica heavy, or this is mountain glacier contribution, or this is thermal expansion, or this is local land sinking, or this is storm surge riding on top of a changed baseline. Tonight's fingerprint did not match ice. It matched transmission range. I checked it 3 times. Then I checked it wrong on purpose. Then I inverted the layer. Then I removed Greenland. Then Antarctica. Then all mountain glaciers. Then sea ice. Then thermal expansion. Then storm surge. Then local subsidence. Each removal should have changed the fingerprint. It did not. The contour stayed locked to broadcast coverage. Not population. Not elevation alone. Not coast. Coverage. Every place receiving the emergency band clearly showed clean shoreline data. Every place in signal shadow showed old terrain. Not dry. Old. As if the ocean had not learned how to draw itself there yet. I said earlier to keep your transmitter live. That is why. If the signal drops, the map may not freeze. It may guess. And the system's guesses tonight have become water. I am not saying the broadcast is causing the flood. I am not saying the flood is listening. I am saying the map only becomes accurate where a signal holds. And accuracy is no longer a comfort. At 2:17, the western relay went dark for 12 seconds. When it returned, 3 inland counties had been reclassified as bay. At 2:19, a northern repeater switched to backup power. The contour around it sharpened like a cut. At 2:21, a coastal station sent a carrier tone without voice. The sea level model drew a perfect circle around its tower and labeled it inlet. At 2:23, I muted our outbound feed for exactly 1 second. I did it with my own hand. I should not have done that. The map moved. Only around us. Not much. A small adjustment. A thin blue crescent touching the service road. Then I unmuted. The crescent stopped. This is the part of the recording I considered deleting. Not because I am ashamed. Because if the archive survives, somebody will hear that and decide to test it. Do not test it. Do not prove a nightmare twice. At 2:25, the first caller light came on. There are no live calls patched into this broadcast. The phones are not part of the emergency feed. The call line was disconnected when the automation system took over at midnight. But the bulb lit anyway. Line 1, then line 2, then line 5, then 7, then all 12. No ringing, no audio, just lights. I did not answer. A ringing phone asks for attention. A silent phone assumes it already has it. The call log opened by itself. Instead of numbers, it listed tide times. Line 1, high tide, 4:12 a.m. Line 2, high tide, 4:12 a.m. Line 3, high tide, 4:12 a.m. Line 4, high tide, 4:12 a.m. Every line. Same tide, same time. Under caller location, this building. There is no tide here. There is no tide here. I am saying that twice because the second time is for me. At 2:28, the global map finished its first complete redraw. The new world looked wrong in the way an old photograph looks wrong when someone has carefully removed a person from it. The shapes were familiar until you looked directly. Florida was mostly gone. The Atlantic had entered places that were never meant to hear surf. The Gulf had climbed north. Low countries in Europe were no longer land shapes but shallow interruptions in blue. River mouths widened into mouths that did not close. Deltas became open water. Islands disappeared by the thousands. Mountain ranges remained. High plateaus remained. Interior ridges became shore. Human borders made no sense at all. The map did not care where countries ended. It cared where water could stay. I took the old laminated world map off the wall. The one with tape on the corners and faded marker circles from storms we had forgotten. I laid it on the desk beside the screen. For a moment, I saw both Earths, the one we memorized, and the one the water wanted. I tried to imagine explaining that to a child. Not as disaster, as replacement. This is where the coast used to be. This is where the coast is now. This was a city. This is a bay. This was a road. This is a channel. This was home. This is depth. At 2:31, the audio spectrum changed. The emergency band usually carries noise in a way I can recognize even half asleep. Every station has texture. Mountain static sounds different from coastal static. A tower in dry, cold air has a thinness to it. Storm static has a rough edge. Sea air adds a soft hiss that sits beneath the carrier. Tonight, the hiss appeared under inland stations first. Not coastal. Inland. Places that were dry on the old map, blue on the new one, and still silent in the real world. The hiss was not loud. It did not interrupt the voice. It waited below it, like water heard through a wall. I routed the audio into the spectrogram. The hiss formed bands. I expected wave noise. I expected random interference. I got contour lines. Each band matched a shoreline segment. At first, I thought it was visual bias. You can see patterns if you are frightened enough. The human brain is built to find faces in smoke and meaning in noise. So I measured. The spacing matched elevation intervals. The thickness matched predicted water depth. The breaks matched transmitter shadows. The brightest line matched 70 meters. The audio was drawing the coastline. Or the coastline was producing audio. I do not know which sentence is worse. At 2:34, the terminal printed, "Signal path incomplete." Then, "Maintain coastal contact." Then, "Do not allow dead air." I did not type those commands. No remote user was listed. No source address. No operator ID. Only one field populated. Origin, shoreline. Shoreline is not a sender. Shoreline is a boundary. A boundary cannot issue instructions. That is what I told myself. Then I remembered that every radio tower is also a boundary. Between signal and silence. Between the room and everywhere else. Between a voice and whoever is still awake enough to hear it. At 2:36, the building pressure changed. Not a dramatic thing. No doors slammed. No window cracked. Just a tiny adjustment in the ears. The kind you feel before weather arrives. Except the weather screen was clear. No storm cell. No front. No pressure drop outside. Inside the building, the barometer dipped. Only inside. The sensor in the hallway reported one value. The sensor outside reported another. The equipment room reported a third. The transmitter cabinet reported pressure equal to coastal marine air. I opened the logbook from last winter. No reason. Habit. When a system lies, old paper feels honest. The last handwritten entry before the digital archive took over was from an overnight operator named Wells. I never met him. His notes were tidy. Too tidy. People who work nights either become messy or impossibly neat. There is no middle. His final page had 3 lines. Transmitter stable. Ice report delayed. Map showing water where road should be. That entry was dated 11 years ago. 11 years before tonight. Under it, in smaller writing, he had added, "Do not correct the coastline." That was when the personal fear arrived. Not when New York disappeared from the emergency layer. Not when Denver got surf conditions. Not when the tide table listed this building. Fear arrived when I realized this room had practiced being impossible before I got here. The event was not new, only complete. At 2:39, I searched the archive for Wells. Not online. Local drive. Old staff records. Maintenance notes. Voice calibration tests. He appeared in 6 folders. All ordinary. Schedule changes. Tower inspection. Generator repair. 1 audio file. No title. Just a date. The same date as the logbook. I should have left it unopened. I know that. But I am alone in a room where the ocean is becoming a radio format. Curiosity is not a weakness in this job. It is how you notice the first wrong thing before it becomes the last thing. I played the file. There was no voice, only room tone. This room. Same hum. Same fan rattle. Same faint tick from the wall clock. Then one sound underneath it. Water. Not waves. Not dripping. A slow pull and return. Like a tide breathing against concrete. I stopped the file after 19 seconds. The live room tone kept making the same sound. I am going to say something that will sound unscientific. I do not think the water is approaching this station. I think the station is being included. There is a difference. Approach has distance. Inclusion has decision. A flood reaches. A map assigns. Tonight, the new coastline is not merely where the ocean ends. It is where the signal can complete itself. At 2:42, the 70-meter contour lit up across the world. Not all at once. In pulses. North Atlantic, Gulf Coast, Western Europe, West Africa, South Asia, East Asia, Pacific Islands that were no longer islands. Then South America. Then back to North America. Each pulse returned on our frequency 1 second later. Not enough delay for satellite relay. Too much for local echo. The pulses formed a loop. I mapped them. They did not spell a word. Thank God for that. Words make people stupid. The moment a phenomenon speaks our language, we stop measuring it and start pleading with it. This did not speak. It routed. The route crossed every former ice margin, every place that had once stored ancient water, every place where frozen mass had pressed on Earth so long the ground itself was still remembering the weight. Then the route crossed modern coastlines, then future coastlines, then broadcast towers, then emergency repeaters, then weather stations, then inland relays, then this building. The final line did not end at the ocean. It ended at the microphone. I moved back from the desk when I saw that. Only a little. Enough for the chair to make a sound. Enough for the microphone to hear the distance. The map flickered. The final line wavered. Not on the screen. In the audio. The carrier tone dipped like a voice losing confidence. I leaned forward again. The line steadied. I am not proud of what that means. At 2:45, I began recording this full account. Before that, I was issuing short bulletins, road closures, elevation advisories, relay instructions, warnings to keep transmitters live. After 2:45, I understood that a bulletin was not enough. Somebody needed the chain. Somebody needed to know how the impossible built itself out of ordinary things. Ice report, map error, tide table, fingerprint mismatch, signal path, shoreline contact, room tone. Because if you only hear the ending, you will think it came from nowhere. Nothing comes from nowhere. Not water, not warnings, not the old air trapped in ice, not the future we pretended was too slow to arrive. At 2:48, I wrote 3 rules on paper and taped them below the clock. 1. Keep speaking. 2. Do not correct the map. 3. If the weather turns normal, check the city names. The third rule mattered sooner than I expected. At 2:51, the emergency crawl disappeared. The screen returned to standard weather layout. Blue background, white text, regional map, calm icons, clouds, rain, wind arrows. For 8 seconds, the room looked ordinary. Then the first bulletin appeared. Coastal fog advisory. Denver Metro. Then, small craft caution. Kansas City. Then, rip current risk. Inland plains. Then, harbor freeze warning. Former Great Lakes Ridge. Former. Not current. Not projected. Former. The system had begun labeling the old world as historical. I could hear myself breathing too loudly. I turned down the monitor. The water sound stayed. I turned the monitor off. The water sound stayed. I unplugged the auxiliary speaker. The water sound stayed. It was in the room tone now. The room had accepted it as background. That is what frightens me most about tonight. Not the extreme. The adjustment. How quickly a system can make room for the impossible. How quickly a map can stop mourning the land it erased. How quickly a voice can say coastal fog advisory for Denver and then keep reading because there is another line after it. At 2:55, a sheet printed with no header, only coordinates. I recognized the first as this station, the second as the Old West Relay, the third as a tower decommissioned in 1998, the fourth as a buoy, the fifth as a mountain observatory, the sixth as a church repeater I repaired once during a winter storm, the seventh as a school roof, the eighth as a fire lookout, the ninth as a lighthouse. That made no sense. The lighthouse was coastal already. But when I checked the old map, I saw the problem. The lighthouse was gone under the +70 line. Its coordinates were not listed as a tower. They were listed as submerged transmitter. At the bottom of the page, path requires 1 voice per contact. 1 voice, not 1 station. Not one signal. One voice. I have been careful not to turn this into superstition. But there are only so many times a machine can choose language adjacent to meaning before you stop calling it a machine. At 2:58, I tried to switch from live transmission to recorded loop. The system rejected it. Reason: voice continuity required. I tried again. Rejected. I recorded 30 seconds of myself reading elevation instructions and loaded it into the automation buffer. Rejected. Reason: previous voice. That phrase stayed on screen. Previous voice. Not recorded voice. Not duplicate file. Previous voice. As if my live voice and my recorded voice were not the same thing. As if the system needed me occurring now. At 3:01, the old Wells audio file reopened by itself. Still no voice. Only room tone and tide. Then the waveform stretched. A shape appeared in the audio editor. Not speech. Not words. A contour. The same contour as the station map. The same crescent touching the service road. The same narrow point of land. The same final line ending at the microphone. Wells had recorded the map 11 years before the map arrived. Or the map had been using recordings to rehearse. At 3:04, the first exterior camera failed. East fence. Then south lot. Then tower base. Not black. Blue. Each feed turned blue from the bottom upward. I looked out the window. No water. No blue. Just dark grass and tower shadow. The cameras saw ocean where my eyes saw land. That is when I understood another rule. The event does not arrive in every instrument at the same time. It chooses the instrument that is most ready to believe it. The model believed first, then the map, then the printer, then the audio, then the cameras. I do not know where human eyes are on that list. I am trying not to find out. I walk to the hallway window with the handheld mic. I am still on the same feed. You may hear the room change. There is a vending machine to my right. A corkboard with old storm notices. A fire extinguisher tag last checked in March. A door to the stairwell. Concrete floor. No water. But the emergency exit sign reflected like it was hanging over a wet surface. There was nothing wet below it. Still, the green letters shimmered. Not much. Just enough. I went back to the desk. I did not run. Running would make the room feel chaste. I refused to give it that. At 3:08, the tide table updated. High tide, 4:12 a.m. Low tide, not applicable. Next high tide, continuous. That is not a tide. That is a decision to stay. The table listed expected water arrival at this station as 3:37 a.m. Then it revised to 3:22. Then 3:15. Then 3:09. Then it paused. Current time, 3:09. Arrival status, complete. I looked down. The floor was dry. The map said it was not. The cameras said it was not. The audio said it was not. The tide table said it was not. Only my eyes disagreed. And I am beginning to understand that eyes are not always the final authority. At 3:11, the transmitter temperature dropped. That should not happen under load. The cabinet runs warm. Always. Even in winter. I put my hand on the side panel. Cold. Not cool. Cold. Like metal left outside before dawn. Condensation formed around the screws. A thin line of moisture gathered along the bottom seam. I touched it. Fresh water. Not salt. That matters. All this talk of ocean, shoreline, tide, coastal advisories, and the first water inside the room was fresh. Meltwater. The old ice arriving without the sea. I wiped it on my sleeve. For a second there was a smell. Not rot. Not brine. Not rain. Cold stone. Old air. Something sealed away long before there were microphones to carry it. Then the smell was gone. At 3:14, the station clock stopped. The transmitter clock did not. The computer clock did not. My watch did not. Only the wall clock. Second hand at 12. Minute hand between 14 and 15. Hour hand just after 3. The same time written in Wells's old log margin. 3:14. I had missed that before. I checked the page again. Under "Do not correct the coastline," he had written. 3:14 is when the room hears it. At 3:14 and 30 seconds, the room tone changed. Not louder, wider, as if the walls had moved away from the microphone, as if I were speaking from a larger room than the one I could see. The reverb increased by maybe half a second, small enough to deny, large enough for a trained ear. I clapped once. The echo came back like it had crossed water. I have not clapped again. There is a discipline to panic. People think panic is chaos. It is not always. Sometimes panic is focus without mercy. You notice everything. The cable bend, the dust under the console, the coffee ring on yesterday's log, the way your own hand looks like it belongs to someone waiting for instructions. I noticed the emergency binder was open. I did not open it. It was on the section for flood relocation. The old paper chart showed evacuation tiers. Tier 1, coastal. Tier 2, lowland. Tier 3, river adjacent. Tier 4, inland support. A black line had been drawn through Tier 4. Beside it, support is now shoreline. Same handwriting as Wells. Or mine. I checked the pen. It was uncapped. My fingers had ink on them. I do not remember writing it. I am going to keep speaking. That is still Rule 1. At 3:18, the first external station rebroadcast us back to ourselves. Not an echo. A clean relay. Our own signal returned 4 seconds delayed, then 7, then 11, then 19. Each delay came from a different tower. Each tower had been reclassified as shoreline contact. My voice layered under my voice. I reduced the monitor until I could barely hear it. Still, under me, say earlier versions of myself saying things I had not said yet. Not full sentences. Fragments. Do not use the old coastline maps. Keep your transmitter live. The map moved. There is no tide here. Then one fragment I had not reached. When the water finally arrives, it will sound like permission. I stopped talking. The returned voice continued for 1 second too long. Then cut. That is the closest I have come to turning off the transmitter. Not because of fear, because of insult. There is something intimate and obscene about hearing your own voice used as infrastructure. But maybe that is all broadcasting has ever been. A human body converted into range, breath into coverage, loneliness into service area. At 3:21, the map labeled the room, not the building, the room. Studio A, dry. Engineering bay, transitional. Hallway, shallow. Tower base, active. Microphone position, contact. I moved the microphone 6 inches. The label followed. I moved it back. The label followed. I unplugged the desk microphone and switched to the handheld. The label changed to mobile contact. There is a mercy in precision. It means the nightmare is not confused. But there is a cruelty in it too. It means the nightmare knows exactly where you are. At 3:24, I received the final global ice report. It was late. It should have been first. It came after the map, after the tides, after the room. The report was clean. No corruption. No missing fields. No dramatic language. Just inventory. Greenland ice sheet. No stable signature. Antarctic ice sheet. No stable signature. Mountain glaciers. No stable signature. Ice caps. No stable signature. Permanent snowfields. No stable signature. sea ice, open water response. Permafrost, thermal transition. Global cryosphere, historical layer. Historical. That word again. The system was not saying the ice was gone. It was saying the ice belonged to the past. There is a difference. Gone can return in memory. Historical gets filed. Historical gets taught. Historical gets placed behind glass. Historical means children will ask what it felt like to have white continents at the ends of the world, and adults will describe something they did not save. At 3:27, all printers stopped. Every screen froze. Every relay light stayed solid. No blinking, no warning tone, no error, just stillness. For 12 seconds, I thought the system had failed. Then the main screen cleared and displayed a blank blue field. In the center, drawing complete. Under it, awaiting voice confirmation. I did not answer. The screen did not change. I counted to 30. Then 60. Then 90. Nothing. I said, "This is Daniel Hale. Emergency Relay Desk 3. Signal active." The screen changed immediately. Voice confirmed. Then, coastline accepted. I want this next part archived clearly. I did not consent to that. A voice confirming its own existence is not consent. A station staying live under emergency protocol is not consent. A human being reading warnings because silence may make the map worse is not consent. If there is an investigation after this, if there is still a word like investigation after this, write that down. The system took continuity for permission. At 3:31, the blue field dissolved into weather radar. No storms, no precipitation, only tide arrows. Across land, hundreds of them. Each arrow pointed toward a relay tower, not toward coast, toward signal. The strongest currents on the map were not where the ocean would naturally move. They were where the emergency network was clearest. I began to understand why old stations matter, why abandoned towers keep appearing in the path, why decommissioned equipment showed up in the coordinate list. The new ocean was not using geography alone. It was using memory, infrastructure memory. Places where people had once sent voice into distance. Places where the air had learned to carry warnings. The ice had held water. The towers had held voices. Tonight both were being released. At 3:34, the old decommissioned tower west of here came online. It has no power, no maintenance road, no feed line, no legal call sign. It came online anyway. A carrier appeared at the edge of our band. Then another. Then another. Old towers. Dead repeaters. Weather masts. Marine beacons. Mountain relays. Buoys that should have been underwater, and inland towers that should never have known the sea. The spectrum filled with contact points. No speech. Just open carriers. A planet of held breath. At 3:36, the main display updated station status. AM 1720, primary voice. West relay, secondary carrier. North repeater, awaiting waterline. Old lighthouse, submerged but active. Mountain observatory, dry but listening. School roof, pending. Church repeater, pending. Fire lookout, pending. This was no longer a flood map. It was a network map, and the network was not finished. The water sound is louder now. You may hear it beneath me. I have checked the floor twice. Dry. The camera feed shows ankle-deep water. The hallway sensor says shallow. The room label says contact. My shoes say dry. One of these systems will be the last to change. I hope it is my eyes. I do not want to see the ocean arrive indoors. I would rather hear it forever and be wrong. At 3:38, the tide schedule revised again. High tide, continuous. Arrival, complete. Departure, not scheduled. Then it added a line. Thank you for maintaining voice. I am not going to dignify that as communication. It is a status message. It is a machine phrase assembled from emergency language. It is not gratitude. Gratitude requires a mind, and I am not ready to give the shoreline a mind. But I am also not ready to say it has none. At 3:41, the normal weather bulletin returned. I will read part of it exactly as it appears because this may be the most useful proof in the archive. Regional forecast. Morning fog along the central shoreline. Marine layer moving across former interstate corridors. Harbor visibility reduced near Denver Metro. Wave action moderate along the Kansas shelf. Small craft should remain docked near Omaha East. Coastal flood statement remains active for all stations below voice elevation. Below voice elevation, not sea elevation. Voice. The system is no longer measuring land against water. It is measuring land against signal. At 3:44, I received a station ID request from no listed source. It asked for our call sign. I did not provide it. It asked for tower height. I did not provide it. It asked for operator count. I did not provide it. It asked for voice count. I did not provide it. Then it filled the answer itself. Voice count, 1. That sound was not in the room. I need that noted. I heard it through the structure, not the speaker. Maybe metal contracting. Maybe tower cable. Maybe something outside. I am not checking. There are heroic versions of this story where the operator takes the flashlight and opens the door and looks. Those versions are written by people who think information is always worth the cost. In real emergencies, you preserve the working system. Right now, the working system is this desk, this chair, this microphone, this voice. I am not leaving it to satisfy the oldest stupid instinct in the human body. At 3:47, the wall map fell. The tape finally gave way. It slid down behind the desk with a sound like cloth. I thought it would startle me more. It did not. The old world has been falling all night. A paper version landing on the floor was just honest. I can still see one corner. Greenland is folded under the cabinet. Antarctica is hidden behind cables. The Pacific is face down. The Atlantic is visible. On the screen, the Atlantic is no longer shaped like the Atlantic. It has climbed. It has entered. It has renamed. And still the room is dry. At 3:50, the system opened a new panel. Future shoreline confidence, 100%. Current shoreline confidence, 100%. Observed water confidence, 0%. That should be impossible. A scientific system should not be fully confident in two things that contradict the observation, unless it has stopped treating observation as primary, unless it has a better source, unless the map is no longer predicting water, unless water is only the visible part of something that arrives first as agreement. The model agreed. The transmitters agreed. The printers agreed. The cameras agreed. The room tone agreed. The old archive agreed. My eyes are the dissenting instrument. At 3:53, the system asked for final local confirmation again. I stayed silent. The carrier tone thinned. The map around the station blurred. The blue crescent at the service road widened. I said, "Signal active." The crescent froze. That was enough. Not yes. Not I agree. Not confirm. Only signal active. Still, the system accepted it. This is how traps are built in procedural language. You never say the forbidden word. You only keep doing the necessary thing until the system decides necessity is permission. If you are hearing this in another station, do not give final confirmation. Say only what keeps your tower live. Say your signal is active. Say your transmitter is warm. Say you are maintaining emergency relay. Do not say coastline confirmed. Do not say map accepted. Do not say water arrival complete. Do not repeat phrases the system gives you unless they are public safety instructions. And do not let dead air sit longer than 5 seconds. I do not know why. I only know what happens to the map. At 3:56, a station south of us disappeared. Not from the air, from the old map layer. Its carrier stayed on spectrum. Its coordinates remained. Its voice stopped. The system marked it. Silent shoreline. Then the water around it filled in completely. No gradual contour. No depth calculation. Just blue. A whole county redrawn in less than a second. After that, a delayed voice returned from the station. Not live. A buffered fragment. Weather desk south relay. Maintaining. Then nothing. The fragment repeated 3 times. Each time lower. Then the system labeled the area bay. That is why I am still speaking. Not courage. Not duty. Not sacrifice. Evidence. I have evidence that voice continuity matters. I have evidence that silence changes the map. 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 But it is shape. And shape is what we have left when the coastlines fail. At 4 o'clock, the first dawn light should have appeared on the eastern camera. It did not. The camera feed is still blue. The window beside me is still black. The screen says sunrise over coastal haze. The room says night. The weather says morning. The tide says continuous. The map says complete. The clock says 3:14 forever. My watch says 4 o'clock. I am choosing the watch for now. A person has to choose something. At 4:03, the system stopped using future tense. All advisories changed from will affect to affecting. All projected areas changed to current zones. All emergency routes changed to maritime corridors. All shelter labels changed to high ground ports. Hospitals became medical harbors. Schools became inland docks. Radio towers became shoreline contacts. This station became primary contact. And under operator status, present. Not safe. Not active. Present. I hate that word more than all the others. Present means accounted for. Present means included. Present means the system has taken attendance. There is one more entry in Wells's log. I did not see it until now because the page was stuck to the back cover. The ink is faded. The handwriting changes halfway through. It begins tidy, then shakes. It says, "If the ice ever reaches 0, the ocean will not come for land first. It will come for the lines we use to describe land. Maps, weather, broadcasts, voices. After that, water is only a formality." I do not know if Wells survived. The staff record says he resigned. The archive says his access was closed. The old audio says his room tone is still here. That is not an answer. It is a category problem. Tonight has made many things into category problems. Ice into history. Land into shoreline. Voice into infrastructure. Weather into memory. Water into agreement. At 4:07, the final automated bulletin cued. I can see it waiting. I have not let it play. The title is ordinary. Morning Regional Weather. The preview is not. I will read it myself so the automation does not take the voice. Morning Regional Weather for the Central Coast. Dense fog before sunrise. Visibility reduced over former inland corridors. Tide remains high across all connected zones. Voice elevation warning remains in effect. Stations experiencing silence may become water without further notice. That last line is new. Stations experiencing silence may become water without further notice. Not flood. Become. I am trying to keep my hands still. The microphone hears everything. The system hears more. At 4:10, the tower light outside changed rhythm. It used to blink once every 3 seconds. Now it blinks in pairs. 2 red pulses. Pause. 2 red pulses. Pause. I check the maintenance panel. No fault. No aviation alert. No power irregularity. The spectrum analyzer shows the same rhythm in the carrier. 2 pulses. Pause. 2 pulses. Pause. I compared it to the tide graph. Same spacing. I compared it to the first alert tone. Same spacing. I compared it to my own speech waveform from the cold open. Same spacing. That is the hidden structure. Not language. Cadence. The event did not need words because it had timing. All night, it has been teaching the systems when to breathe. At 4:12, all 12 phone lights went out. The tide table had listed 4:12 from the beginning. High tide. Every line. Every caller. This building. The room is silent now except for the transmitter, the hum, and the water underneath both. No phone lights. No printer. No alerts. No map movement. The system has stopped asking. That should make me feel better. It does not. Things stop asking when they already have what they need. I am looking at the floor. Dry. I am looking at the camera feed. Water to the base of the desk. I am looking at the map. This room is blue. I am looking at my hands. They are shaking. Not much. Enough. The microphone label still says contact. The operator status still says present. The global ice layer still says historical. The final coastline still ends here. There is one new line. Signal path complete. I know what the ending is supposed to sound like. In recordings like this, the voice cuts off. The signal drops. The room goes dark. Something happens that gives the listener permission to stop imagining. I do not think we get that mercy tonight. The transmitter is stable. The generator is full. The tower is live. The system wants continuity, and I am still here. So this will not end like a warning. It will end like a weather report, because that is what the world chose to become. Morning regional weather for the Central Coast. Dense fog before sunrise. Marine layer extending across former inland corridors. Visibility poor near Denver Harbor. Moderate wave action along the Kansas Shelf. Small craft advisory remains active for Omaha East. Coastal flood warning continues for all stations below voice elevation. Former maps should not be used for navigation. Former roads may appear as channels. Former cities may appear as depth readings. Former shorelines may appear in memory. Stations are advised to maintain voice contact. Stations are advised not to correct the coastline. Stations are advised not to allow dead air. This is Daniel Hale. Emergency Relay Desk 3. The signal is active. The room is dry. The map says it is not. And the tide schedule says the water arrived before I began speaking. If you can hear this from higher ground, answer with carrier only. Do not use words. Do not confirm the map. Do not trust the old coast. And if your weather screen says the ocean is near you, do not look out the window first. Look at the floor. Morning forecast update. Coastal fog advisory remains active for Denver Metro. Surf conditions are improving. Voice contact accepted.